Hello, and welcome to In the Jumpseat, a podcast by CUPE Local 8125 WestJet Component for WestJet cabin crew and other listeners. My name is Cameron Jones, recording secretary for the Local, and I am your host on today's episode. Today we're diving into Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code, a piece of legislation that has major impacts on our right to strike and overall bargaining process. We'll talk about what it means, how it's been used recently, and what it means for us as WestJet flight attendants as we head into bargaining. I'm joined by our president, Alia Hussain, to unpack all this. Thanks for joining us today, Alia. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Cameron.
So we're going to dive right into what is Section 107. I think a lot of us have heard the term Section 107, but can you start by explaining what it is and what powers it gives the government?
So I'm going to read directly from the code. Section 107 of the code grants the Minister of the Labour Board discretionary power to take actions, including directing the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, the CIRB, to end a strike or lockout in order to, and I quote, maintain or secure industrial peace and, quote, promote conditions favorable to the settlement of industrial disputes. So specifically, what this means is it allows the Minister of Jobs and Families to suspend or prevent a strike or lockout if they believe that this is in the public's best interests. What this does is this effectively takes away the workers' right to strike, and it puts a power imbalance into the bargaining room. This legislation has been used increasingly in the last few years, specifically affecting federally regulated groups such as Canada Post or CNRL railway dispute. And of course, then we had the port workers in BC.
Yeah, and this is something, like you said, we see increasingly in recent years, but I think it's really important to acknowledge right at the beginning of this podcast. We're talking about Section 107 and how it affects strikes, lockouts, or what we see as overarching job action. And we do really want to hammer home that for our members, the goal is always to get a deal at the table. And like we talked about in our previous episode, we are committed and the company is committed to, at this point, sitting down and negotiating a deal that from our perspective works for our cabin crew. So the goal is never to go on strike. We don't necessarily want to go on strike. However, it is something that is available to us as part of the Canada Labour Code bargaining cycle. But Section 107 is something to be aware of, especially as we've seen it as recently as this summer with Air Canada. And I also want to point out with this is not the first time that Section 107 has been used. As you mentioned, it's happened to other federally regulated workplaces previously. And there are challenges that are going on at the Supreme Court level as to if these previous applications of Section 107 are considered to be constitutional or not. It is important to point out, though, however, the result of these constitutional challenges likely will not come out in this bargaining cycle. However, it is something that I think all unions in Canada will be paying attention to see if this is a constitutional, what the outcome of this constitutional challenge is going to be. Because like you said, we've seen an increase in the application of it more and more, especially under this government.
One of the key decisions that the local executive committee of 8125 made early on was to acquire the services of Callie Ray Legal Services out in Toronto through Michael Church. And so he's a lawyer, labor lawyer in Canada, well known, has worked with flight attendants for years. And he's actually leading 3 or 4, to my understanding, of the charter challenges against the use of Section 107. So that's the reason why we have him in our bargaining room watching our process unfold. So that way we have someone who's already close to the fire, understanding and directing and supporting this local as we navigate the potential that Section 107 might be used in our bargaining cycle.
I couldn't agree more, and he's definitely a valuable asset for us to have as we potentially approach a position of being in legal job action. So I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier on in our episode, but Alia, can you maybe walk us through, based off the examples of Air Canada, where does this leave us and how is our local approaching bargaining?
So I want to state on the outset, every company is different, every bargaining table looks different, and while we recognize that there is a reliance on Section 107 in the broader environment, our local is fully committed to bargaining in good faith and remaining at the table until we receive the deal that we believe our membership would support and ultimately ratify. And what's key here to note is that we believe that the best deal for our membership will be reached at the table and not by government intervention. We want to allow the negotiation process to play out. And so we're very hopeful this round of bargaining that as a result of the Air Canada experience, that the government stays out of our bargaining room, basically, and that the company doesn't consider the use of Section 107 either, and that we just allow the actual labor code bargaining model to play itself out, whatever that means. And ultimately, in the end, we just need to reach a collective agreement that reflects the respect, fair pay, and dignity our membership so deserves.
Thank you for that, Alia. So, as many are aware, our collective agreement is expiring on December 31st of this year for our mainline cabin crew. And a commonly asked question that we're receiving is, are we going on to strike on December 31st? So, can you maybe provide us with some information or context to this?
For sure, Cameron. So, strike action can only happen if bargaining reaches an impasse, a strike vote has been held and passed, meaning we've received a mandate from our membership that, yes, we will go on strike, and the legal notice of strike action is given. Our goal, and I need to reiterate this, is to reach a goal. Our goal, is to reach a deal at the table. And it's also not uncommon for negotiations to exceed past the expiry of the collective agreement. So I can't definitively answer this question at this stage. What I can tell you is that's the criteria that needs to be in place in order for us to go on strike.
Thank you for providing some context into that. And for our members listening, there will be subsequent communications, and we are committed to keeping you in the loop as we continue throughout bargaining. If there are any changes or as we go through the phases, I'd like to mention that on our website, we do have kind of a visual map of what the entire bargaining process or bargaining cycle is under the Canada Labour Code. So that's available on our website, which provides you with more information. Or if you have specific questions, please reach out to your base representation, and we can provide you with some more guidance that way.
In addition to that, Cameron, something we heard during the bargaining town halls was questions around once the collective agreement expires, what happens to our working conditions? Our working conditions are just paused, and that collective agreement will continue to apply until a new collective agreement is negotiated, and no changes can happen to our working conditions.
Thank you for that, Alia. And I think that's really important that you point out that statutory freeze that occurs as part of the negotiation cycle within the Canada Labour Code. And the reason for that statutory freeze is to ensure that the company can't change our working conditions to try and influence how negotiations occur. So that's a really good point. And thank you for bringing that up. So another question we've kind of been getting from the membership is, so currently we're not in a strike position, we're not in a job action position, and we're in our regular negotiation cycle, making progress at the table, and we're committed to doing so. So can you maybe provide us with some guidance about what our membership can do right now to support and show their unity and support of the bargaining committee in the room, and what maybe some of the activities are that they can't do or we don't necessarily want to encourage them to do at this point in time?
So one of the most important things the membership can do is wear their union pin. We're asking this because that is our first sign of showing unity and solidarity across our group, that we're wearing our WestJet Component pin. Beyond that, we would encourage our membership to engage in social media. We live in a very media-driven era where everything is happening on social media. So we really recommend that our membership share all of our 8125 content. Recognizing, of course, we ask you to share the content, but please don't add any extra flair, if you will, to the content, because our social media policies are far-reaching. So the safest way for our membership to engage is just to share our social media off of 8125. And Cameron, what are those sites?
Yeah, so we have our main social media sites that we have currently is we have our Instagram, which is at WestJet Component, as well as our Facebook, which is also WestJet Component. And then you can also find our podcast on all of our major streaming platforms, such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube. So, and that's also accessible on our website. So it's a great one-stop shop. And I think other ways that our members can show unity is by attending any virtual town halls, because we know we'll be having some of those coming up. Our member engagement committee is going to be hosting union events, as well as talking to our coworkers. And what spaces can our coworkers and members, what are the spaces you'd recommend they have discussions about the bargaining cycle?
So I'll start where I don't recommend having these conversations. I don't recommend having these conversations on board the aircraft. That's our workspace. We're at work, and so we need to be focused on working. Where we can have these conversations are on our layovers and really anywhere else in our private moments. But I would also remind everyone that when we are engaging with one another, we have to recognize that our group is a very diverse group and there's a lot of opinions and not everybody sees everything the same way. So we need to ensure that when we are engaging in any dialogue that we're doing so with a degree of openness, respectfulness, and that it's governed by the Business Code of Conduct, the Union Equality Statement, and the Union Code of Conduct.
So that's kind of stuff that we can have the membership do, but we're going to transition a little bit into what we might not want our members to do at this point, because we want to ensure that when you are participating, we want the participation, we want the engagement, but we want to make sure we do it in a way that, one, is in compliance with the Canada Labour Code, two, ensures that we're bargaining in good faith, and three, doesn't potentially open up our members to risk of discipline or follow-up from the company. So can you maybe walk us through some of the things we want to avoid at this point?
You bet, Cameron. So some of the things that we're going to want to avoid at this stage is the refusal to work any scheduled flights, engaging in any type of stoppage, slowdowns, or coordinated sick-outs, taking any action that violates the collective agreement or labor law, any non-compliance of SOPs, including the use of the PA, changing procedures or not following company policies. And this one's really important. We're asking our membership to ensure adherence to standard operating procedures. Making announcements that are ad lib exposes our membership to a risk that the union doesn't want you taking. Let the union be your voice and share your concerns and take on the advocacy that is necessary to ensure the company understands our position. We want our membership to be the professionals that we know they are when they're at work and don't expose themselves to any unnecessary risk. And we recognize that solidarity actions are powerful and legal, and we will continue to do them as we move forward in the bargaining process. And Cameron and Alex, as the leads of our member engagement and strike committee, will be sharing opportunities in the near future, to my understanding, Cameron, some really fun opportunities in the near future for our members to engage in and be able to express their solidarity, and to the company the need and desire for this to want for our working conditions to change.
Yes. So we asked our membership to stay tuned. There will be emails for opportunities of different ways you can show your unity and, like we said, give the bargaining committee the power in the room. So moving on to some of the recent events, some of our members of our local executive committee recently went to Ottawa for a day of action relating to unpaid work. So can you maybe talk about that experience a little bit?
You bet. So we showed up in Ottawa on September 16th to participate in a rally at Parliament Hill to end unpaid work. And we also had the opportunity to serve notice to bargain from Parliament Hill. We were joined by other airline unions and united in a day of action to end unpaid work. So Flair was there, Transat was there, Air Canada was there, and the NDP announced legislation to limit the use of Section 107 under the Labour Code to government. We also had the local executive attend a question and answer period in the House of Commons. We were then told, so initially we entered the House wearing the very t-shirt that you're wearing in this podcast, which says Unpaid Work Won't Fly on it. And we got approval from the Sergeant-at-Arms to enter the building with these t-shirts on. We sat down, and I think we had been in question and answer period for about 20 minutes, at which point we were advised that there was a minister that expressed a discomfort in the shirts. They didn't like the messaging on the shirts, and we were asked to leave. And not only was that incredibly awkward, it was unbelievably unfortunate because we had approval to be in the House of Commons, and then we suddenly didn't have approval to be in the House of Commons.
And I think to make it explicitly clear, when we say we had approval, they had taken photos of our shirts and sent them so that they knew exactly what the messaging was on. And I can't agree with you more. This was incredibly disappointing and highlights exactly why we can't rely only on the government to solve unpaid work. And this is something that we are going to be addressing at the bargaining table. So another facet of unpaid work relating to the government is the unpaid work probe that is currently going on. So We attended the probe into unpaid work that's being done currently by the federal government. So can you maybe talk to us about what some of the conversation was and what we might be able to expect out of this probe?
So this probe was part of the commitment that the Minister of Jobs and Families made to look into the issue of unpaid work as a result of what was going on with Air Canada. This probe included unions, company management, and other labor groups. There was significant discussion on the Unpaid Work Won't Fly campaign, members making less than minimum wage once unpaid hours are factored in. And I think the discussion lasted a couple of hours. And it was interesting because we had company legal presenting, and when I say company, I don't mean WestJet, I just mean the company. So any airline company representative presented their perspective on things, and they took a very hard line and said, there is no issue with unpaid work. Collective agreements are bargained as they are, and it is what it is. And the locals took a different perspective. Absolutely not. There is unpaid work. There is an issue with this. And there is also an issue with some of our lower pay scales as a direct result of the credit system aren't even making minimum wage under certain circumstances. So we're going to move now towards written submissions, and those are due on October 17th. So between bargaining, we are also working on submissions into the probe of unpaid work.
Yeah, these written submissions are going to really share the lived experience of flight attendants and show how unpaid work actually impacts us every single day. And the union's message is clear, is that unpaid work is unacceptable and it must end. So Alia, that pretty much wraps up our episode for today. Can you maybe walk us through some key messages that you want to leave with our members as we continue on this journey?
You bet. So what we want the membership to know is that we're committed to good faith bargaining and securing a strong collective agreement. We talked about Section 107, and it's a reminder that we simply cannot rely on the government to make changes that are necessary, and that our strength comes from our membership's unity, and that our members' engagement, whether it's in town halls, actions, showing support, is what drives success at this table.
Yeah, and to reiterate, ensuring that our membership is staying connected, staying informed, and that you know that your voice matters every step of the way. And you can do that via our social media, via our Instagram, listening and sharing these podcasts. And there's so many ways for you to stay engaged, stay informed. So we really appreciate it. Thank you again, Alia, for joining us. Once again, thank you so much for joining us in the Jump Seat.